Hello everyone, myself Dr. Laxmi Upadhyaya, Department of Biomedical Engineering, Bundelkhand University, Jhansi. Today's lecture topic is Human Respiratory System. It comes under the subject Human Anatomy and Physiology, and the reference material has been taken from Mr. Zishan Akhtar and Ryan M. Zauri. So let us have a detailed discussion about this topic. Human respiratory system is primarily a biological and a physiological system which is mainly aimed at exchange of gases in the human or any other organism. It is primarily focusing on the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the organism and the environment. It comprises of various organs which include as follows. Now let us come to what exactly a respiratory system aims at, what are its functions in human beings especially. First is, it is a passageway to lungs and purify, warm and humidify the incoming air. That means that the respiratory system, the first of all the preventive mechanism, it acts as the preventive mechanism for the microbes, the dust particles and any other undesired particles entering into the system. So, it acts as a preventive barrier, it purifies the air and it warms it, because it is very critical that the air which is being inhaled is at the same temperature as the organism. So, it warms it up and then it humidifies the incoming air, because if the air is too much dry, it can be harmful to the organism or human being in particular. Second is protection from microbes by preventing its entry. The nasal cavity comprises of very minute hairs, hair follicles and the mucous membrane. The mucous membrane entraps or it sticks out the microbes, and thus it prevents the microbes as well as the dust particles, and the air which enters the organism is very much in its pure form. Third function is exchange of gases between lungs and bloodstream. The air which is inhaled inside the lungs, the exchange of gases takes place at two levels. The first level is the exchange of gases, mainly oxygen and carbon dioxide, between the air in the alveoli and the blood in the surrounding capillaries. This is the first level where exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide takes place. Then there is another level where the gaseous exchange takes place. This is exchange of gases between bloodstream and body tissues. So, when the blood from the capillaries surrounding the alveoli in the lungs, it is carried to the different body tissues. There the cells which have already been functioning, they excrete out carbon dioxide, and the oxygen from the lungs is carried out from the blood into the body tissues. The body tissues and the blood stream, there again exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide takes place, and the oxygen is inhaled by the cells, and the carbon dioxide which is excreted out as a waste material from the different cellular metabolic processes, it is absorbed up by the blood in the capillaries by the process of diffusion mainly. Then next function of respiratory system is removal of waste gases like carbon dioxide from the body while exhaling. So, there are a lot of waste gases which are being released, and carbon dioxide is main component of the waste gases, and the waste while exhaling the carbon dioxide is exhaled out. It is another function of the respiratory system. Then regulation of blood pH. The level of carbon dioxide, it maintains it controls the pH of the blood, or indirectly we can say the acidity or the basicity of the blood, and that is why the respiration or the breathing process indirectly regulates the blood pH as well. Then another function of respiratory system is vibration of the vocal cords. The larynx, as we will see in the upcoming slides, larynx or the voice box is the organ where the vocal cords are placed, and the vibration of these vocal cords, they produce sound. So, the vibration of vocal cords or the production of sound is yet another function of the respiratory system. Another function is olfaction or smelling. Respiratory system also plays a very critical role in the smelling sense. So, let us move on to next slide. Now, what are the key components or key organs, which are the specific organs of respiratory system? Respiratory system mainly comprises of nose and the nasal cavity, the pharynx, the larynx, trachea, bronchi, lungs and alveoli. Nose or the nasal cavity, let us see, this is the protrusion of this protrusion, external part is called the nose, and the internal part is called nasal cavity. The nasal cavity is divided by a cartilaginous septum into two parts, the right nostril and the left nostril. Air, when it enters the nose, enters nasal cavity. Nasal cavity is lined by minute hair follicles and a mucous membrane. The function of hair follicles and mucous membrane is to entrap any microbe, pathogens or dust particles or any other undesired particles which is not desirable for the human being. It gets entrapped by the hair follicles and the sticky mucous membrane inside the nasal cavity. So, this is the first function of nose and nasal cavity in general. The second function, as we have already discussed, is to warm up the air. If the air is too cold, it can be harmful for the organism. So, the air entering into the organism is warmed up to the level of temperature of the organism. And yet another function of nasal cavity is to humidify the air. We have already seen that if the air entering in the organism is too dry, it can be harmful. It can create a lot of physiological troubles. So, the air entering into the organism needs to be humidified. So, this is another function of the nasal cavity. Then comes the next organ, pharynx. Pharynx is actually, it is a common passage which immediately follows the nasal cavity, and it bifurcates into just below the pharynx we have larynx. Larynx is also called voice box. Pharynx has two passages. One leads to esophagus and the other leads to the larynx, which is the respiratory system. So, pharynx is the area where which is the demarcating point between the respiratory system and the gastrointestinal tract. After pharynx, we have larynx or the voice box. Larynx is a typical respiratory organ, and it has a cartilaginous flap like structure which is called epiglottis. The main function of larynx is it has vocal cords in it, and the vibration of vocal cords create sound production. So, the main function of larynx is the vibration of vocal cords leading to the sound production. Another function of larynx is that it has a cartilaginous flap like structure called epiglottis, which prevents the incoming food particle from entering into the respiratory tract. So, in case a person is eating food, it is the function of epiglottis, it gets automatically closed up when a person is eating food, so that any food particle is prevented from being entered into the respiratory tract. So, larynx or the voice box, because larynx has vocal cords for sound production, it is also referred to as voice box. Then trachea, we can clearly see what exactly trachea is. Trachea is a tubular pipe like structure which connects larynx to the lungs by bifurcating into different sub branches of tubes. The trachea is also referred to as windpipe. Trachea is supported, it consists of incomplete C-shaped cartilaginous ring like structure, and the main function of these C-shaped cartilaginous structure is that it keeps on expanding and it hardens the windpipe. It keeps the tubular structure from larynx to the lungs in a continuous hardened form. So, the primary function of the C-shaped cartilaginous rings in trachea is to maintain the structure of this windpipe and to keep it open. Now, after trachea we have bronchi. Trachea or the windpipe, while moving from larynx coming down to this lungs, it bifurcates into two tubular structure, or it branches out into two tubes which are called bronchi. So, if we are the trachea keeps on dividing in a tree like format. A tree branching occurs in the form of a tree, and the branching and the sub branching and the sub branching keeps on continuing till a terminal point is reached, which are called as alveoli. So, we will see in the upcoming slides how exactly the branching pattern or tracheobronchial tree branching pattern occurs. Next is bronchi. So, we have already seen what bronchi are. Trachea dividing into branches and sub branches, they are called as bronchi. And finally, lungs, which are the primary organ of respiration, which comprises of sac like, very minute thin walled sac like or balloon like structure called alveoli. Now, let us move on to what is the difference between breathing and respiration. Breathing is primarily a physical process which only includes inhaling oxygen and exhaling carbon dioxide. So, it is just a mechanical process, it is only a physical process, while respiration is a wider term. It includes a chemical process, it includes the usage of oxygen to break down the glucose for generating energy, usually in the form of adenosine triphosphates. So, this energy is utilized for carrying out different metabolic activities inside the cell. So, the fundamental difference between breathing and respiration is that breathing is a mechanical or a physical process, while respiration is a biochemical process. Now, see, we can easily see this is the anterior view of larynx or voice box. We can see this is the epiglottis, the cartilaginous flap like structure, which we have already discussed that it shuts down while we intake food. So, in case food is taken, it automatically gets shut down, so that any food particle is prevented from entering the respiratory system. Then we have this hyoid bone and this laryngeal prominence, thyroid gland, cricoid cartilage, and these are the incomplete, the C-shaped tracheal cartilages. So, this is the anterior view and this is posterior view. This thyroid cartilage and similar, we were talking about the incomplete C-shaped cartilaginous structure. Now, we have already discussed the function of larynx. Now, trachea or the windpipe, we can very clearly see this is the three-dimensional look of larynx or the voice box, and this is trachea, tracheal cartilages, the C-shaped structure, the cartilaginous. Then root of the left lung. See, the trachea divides, this is the first division. This division is called primary division or primary bronchi, because after trachea it divides from here for the first time. This division is referred to as primary bronchi, and when these primary bronchi further divide, they are called as secondary bronchi. So, these two are the primary bronchi, and this division, these two are the secondary bronchi. As we can see, they have been well marked here, primary bronchi and secondary bronchi, and it is from these primary bronchi itself that the lungs start, root of the left lung and root of the right lung. This is another 3D view of trachea. Here we can see this is right bronchus and this is the left bronchus. So, like this. Now, what are the main features of trachea? Connects larynx with the bronchi. This is the connection. This is the bronchi and this is the larynx. So, the bronchi and this larynx and the bronchi, they are being well connected with through the trachea or the windpipe. The walls of trachea comprise of C-shaped cartilaginous structure. We have already discussed what is the function of these C-shaped cartilaginous structure. Then they are lined with ciliated mucosa. The main function of this mucosa is to provide again the same function which is being carried out by the nasal cavity, is to entrap any undesired pathogen or the dust particle, as well as to ensure the movement of air. So, the ciliated mucosa mainly it is for ensuring the movement of air. The air does not stick up in any pipe. Now, this is the respiratory tree division, how the division takes place. We have already seen this is larynx, the trachea. The first division is like this. The trachea divides, first division is this. This is primary bronchi. The primary bronchi further divides into the secondary bronchi, and similarly this one also, it divides into the secondary bronchi, and the secondary bronchi, they further branch into numerous branches which are called as tertiary bronchi. These are tertiary bronchi, and the tertiary bronchi, they further branch into minute fine tubes or rather tubules which are called as bronchioles. So, here we can see these are the bronchioles. They are finer tube or tubules which are the end product of branching and sub-branching of the trachea and primary bronchi, secondary bronchi and tertiary bronchi, and these are the thinnermost tubular structure in the respiratory system. Now, the bronchioles finally they terminate into very minute single walled cellular structure. They are sac like structure, or rather they are balloon like structure which are called as alveoli. Now, lungs. Lungs are the most important and primary organ of respiration. What exactly lungs comprise of? First of all, pulmonary or visceral pleura covers the lung. So, the membrane that covers the lung, this particular membrane, this one, the outer membrane that covers the lungs, it is referred to as the visceral pleura or the pulmonary membrane. Then parietal pleura lines the walls of the thoracic cavity. So, the second layer is the parietal pleura. It covers the complete thoracic cavity, this one, this. Then the pleural fluid fills the area between layers of pleura to allow gliding. Now, where this gliding is exactly required? While respiration or breathing is carried out, we see that there is expansion and contraction, gradual expansion and contraction of the lungs. So, for this continuous expansion and contraction to carry out, there needs to be some fluid like structure which create a greasing mechanism, and it is carried out smoothly. So, for that this pleural fluid is the component which plays this particular role. Now, we see the left lung is only divided into two lobes, the upper lobe and the lower lobe, while the right lung is divided into three lobes, the upper lobe, middle lobe and lower lobe. So, we should keep in mind that the left lung consists of two lobes, upper lobe and lower lobe, while the right lung comprises of three lobes, the upper, middle and the lower lobe. Now, we were already discussing the branching and sub-branching of the bronchioles and the alveoli. We see after being dividing into branching and sub-branching into primary bronchi, secondary bronchi and tertiary bronchi and bronchioles, the bronchioles end into balloon like structure or single cellular wall like structure, sac like structure called alveoli. Alveoli has three components, the alveolar duct, the alveolar sac and the alveolus itself. So, we can clearly see this is a three-dimensional structure, and it is the capillaries surrounding these alveoli which contains the blood, where actual exchange of gases, that is carbon dioxide and oxygen, takes place. The oxygen in the alveoli is taken up by the blood in the capillary, and the carbon dioxide in the blood in the capillaries, it is exhaled out into the alveoli. So, this is the 3D structure of these alveoli, and it is here that the first level of gaseous exchange, that is oxygen and carbon dioxide, takes place. Now, there are basically two phases in breathing or in ventilation. The first is inhalation and the second is exhalation. We very well know inhalation is the intake of air, mainly oxygen, and exhalation is the exhaling or the giving out of air, which mainly comprises waste gases like carbon dioxide. So, these two processes again have been divided into different phases, which we will be reading in the upcoming lectures. So, that is all for today.